Hello and welcome to MII Media Talks. This is the show where we interview top experts in the Christian media space and we discuss topics that are important and relevant for your ministry. Today we are talking about how to build a healthy online ministry. We are discussing strategically important points, including how to map your online ministry path. We are talking about how to break up your online ministry into phases and take it one step at a time. We are talking about measuring the success of your online ministry and also about building online experiences for your audience. There are lots of practical tips and techniques included in this. You do not want to miss this week's episode. The expert guest we have in house to help us with this is Jay Kranda. Jay Kranda is the online pastor of Saddleback Church. He oversees an online community with small groups, home groups, and local gatherings around the globe. He is the co-author of the free ebook, State of the Online Church, and he writes regularly at jkranda.com. He's married to Jody, and they have 2 boys and a girl. Here is my interview with Jay Kranda. Jay, welcome to Media Talks. Really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And today we have a very exciting topic. I'm excited about the topic, healthy online ministry. But before we go into the topic, we want to hear a little bit about you. So tell us, take us back a little bit into your story, how you started and how you got to where you are right now. All yours.
Yeah, so I've been the online pastor at Saddleback Church in Southern California for about 8 years, been doing online ministry for 10 years. And really my church was really a leader in the space of figuring out how to do this. And they allowed me to step into a role as like a young college grad and as somebody who wanted to be a pastor and lean into how to figure out digital. And so my church had been streaming for a while, had been doing things online. I got to come alongside of some amazing people to figure out online groups. So we've been doing online groups for almost 8 years and really figuring out what does it look like to move somebody that's watching online to engage in your church, another church, or even start a church. And so I have been married, 10 plus years, have 3 kids, spent all my time in Southern California and I have visited a lot of places, but I am definitely whatever you think, if you're watching this or listening, whatever you think of a Southern California kid, I probably did it. I skateboarded, spent time in the ocean, all that. So I'm like, whatever the movies say that's who I am.
Jay, I have one more question before we go into the topic. And I'm very curious, like many of us, being a pastor, Bible college student, and now an online pastor. So how did that journey come about, like being a pastor and then into the digital and the online world? Give us a little bit of insight on what happened there.
Yeah, for sure. When I started out, it was very much, I wanted to do online. I wanted to do youth ministry because I accepted Jesus when I was 13 years old. And I had gone through, a journey of just a lot of pain with my own family. My parents divorced. I was being raised at the time by my grandparents, and my youth pastor at the time was pretty influential in my life. And because of that, I wanted to do that because of that impact. But one of the things that changed was I stepped into an opportunity at Saddleback Church, which I did not grow up at Saddleback at this church. And I kind of got exposed to the digital space. And one of the things that was the most appealing to me was just how many people it was reaching with very little investment. It's kind of like a lot of people have realized this with Facebook and YouTube. It's like, oh, wow, like 100 people are watching this. And, maybe you're used to, 50 people. And now you could and that spark just made with very little time, you could reach a lot of different people. And so even when I was starting to kind of begin my role as an online pastor, I was going through seminary at the time. And I remember asking some of my professors, which they were world-renowned professors, and they didn't really even know how to process what I was doing. They started to think about it theologically. And I just remember going, that outside of how many people we're reaching, the other opportunity to be able to actually like figure something out. I don't think you get a lot of opportunities in life to become to figure something out without very little input. And not that I was thinking about becoming an expert, but I was like, this is kind of cool. I could actually kind of carve out my own space for this. And I love that there was no outline. There was no manual that I could go read. And so I think those are the things that kind of drew my attention to it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And on the topic of figuring out, we've got something that you figured out about running a healthy online ministry and building it like that. So I have looked at that framework and I just absolutely love it. So we would love for you to take us through that and start wherever you want to start. And yeah, just take us through how to build a healthy online ministry.
Yeah, it's definitely a big question. And what I would say, the first thing is that you gotta figure out how you're going to do this within your own church's context, because every church, every denomination, every pastor, we're all called to the same things, but the flavor of how we do that, or the methodology of how we do church in our context, is going to look a little different. So this is not a copy and paste moment. This is, really figuring out what does it look like in your context. So one of the things that I recommend you to do with your team or your whoever is kind of helping you along this way is to kind of on a whiteboard draw out, okay, this is what church means to us, and draw out a funnel. Okay, somebody watches, they get into a Bible study, they take these classes, they read these things, and really, first off, if you can't do that, that's actually something you need to do even before you do online. You actually need to figure out how do you do it. And so draw out your process on a whiteboard or on a chalkboard or whatever, or, create something on a computer, and then actually go, okay, what do we want to do online and what do we not want to do online? And I think one of the tensions with healthy online church is that healthy online ministry is never saying in person is never happening. I think healthy online ministry is seeing that online can amplify. You can reach more people. You can actually do community with more people, but there still should be this draw of bringing people into face-to-face community. It doesn't mean it happens on day one. Doesn't even mean it needs to happen in the first month, but you have a strategy. Really, you and I, we want physical connection. We need physical connection, and the church is physical, but guess what? The church is also spiritual and it's immaterial. Our primary connection is with God, and God the Father is not something, God the Father is not something right in front of me that I'm shaking his hand, but I can be connected to him. And so your church, the number one thing is figure out very clearly who you are. And then second, I would actually draw out your process on some kind of whiteboard, and then figure out what do you want to do digitally. And then my suggestion is that to do something healthy doesn't mean you do everything, within the first week. Traditionally when you plant a church, it takes years until you start to expand different kind of areas. So for example, I'm really interested in doing online groups, and I'm really interested in streaming. I'm really interested in getting people to serve online. Well, break it up into phases. It's like building a house. You build the foundation, then you build the framework, and then you kind of put on the drywall, and then you slowly build it out. And so think of the digital as a slow kind of process of building out. So maybe the first 6 months, you just zero in on how to stream your service. And how does somebody move from watching it to filling out like maybe a digital form, or maybe it's DMing your page, or maybe it's texting you through, WhatsApp. And then who's following up? What are they sending back? Who's that team? And then how does somebody move from a watcher to a tender? What does it look like? On the stream that you're doing on Facebook or YouTube, are you talking to that audience? Are you saying stuff like, hey, thanks for watching this week on Facebook. We would love to hear from you. And then, so it's like zeroing in that experience. Maybe you're on your phone, you're streaming, and you're using your phone, and maybe you have a mentality of making your stream 1% better every week. So you take 6 months and just dial in your streaming process. And what does that look like? And then after 6 months, you figure out, we want to launch online groups. And you actually start to expand into that endeavor. And you go, okay, what platforms? Okay, Zoom, it's Facebook Messenger rooms, this is what it looks like. And then that will start to unlock, the next phase, which is like, how do we train people online? Because your small group leaders are going to want to ask some questions, and maybe you want to launch a course. And so you lean in. And so this is why think of it as you figure out what your church wants to do, you draw out your process, and then you take it in phases. But I would encourage anybody starting out to really think about it up front and have the big questions up front, because you don't need, for example, there's some churches right now, and maybe somebody listening, watching this doesn't know, there's some churches do online baptisms. They actually baptize people over Skype and different things. And if your church doesn't want to do that, that's okay. You don't need to do that in order to do it. I think theological convictions are important, and there's reasons why there's distinctions, and your church needs to be your church. And so I found by having those conversations up front, by drawing a line, going, you know what, we're not going to, for example, like for us, doing communion online isn't that big of a deal, but there are a lot of denominations and churches, they want the pastor, and I would say that's okay. That's okay if you want to limit. So for example, communion for us, we would say, we want you to take it with other people. And so you either take it with your family in your home, or you get on a Zoom call and you're taking it corporately online. If your church doesn't want to enable online communion, maybe have the rule that you have to take it with your family. You need another person present. And these are the conversations you only can have when you are honest. And this is why up front, the whiteboard drives some of that conversation. So I think at a high level, having that conversation, thinking about it in phases, and thinking about how to move a watcher to a tender, those are the number one things that I would kind of start to kind of digest and be honest about.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like that idea of looking at whatever the organization has been doing, whether it's a church or a ministry, and also looking at how that kind of translates into digital, and then the digital kind of adds or complements that and helps it grow. So I think that's a view that is very important for everyone listening, because it's not about having digital. It's like a digital department. I said, I always tell there's nothing called a digital department. The digital is everything. Every department's got to be integrated with digital. So I really like that. And so one is starting with thinking. So what should we do next? So when we've got the plan in place, we've got the step-by-step process. Let's just say we've lined out a calendar saying this is how we're going to do it. What should we do next?
Yeah, so I think one thing is measuring success is really important up front. So I think a lot of churches, this is something that is overlooked, is actually creating like a digital dashboard of your church service, specifically your church service. So I would actually have, and really it's Peter Drucker has a great line, kind of the father of modern management. He has a great line that, whatever you measure, you need to be able to measure it and influence it. And I would just suggest having somebody and something created where you go, okay, every week we are measuring on Facebook and YouTube, in our website, we're going to measure how many views we get. So every Sunday at 5:00, we're going to look at the last 7 days views, boom. And then measure every week as well, DMs or text messages or calls or whatever it is, any type of next step. And so the idea is like, great, we had 100 views, and then we had 10 next steps. And by measuring that every week, I think it's it becomes very helpful for the conversation, because no longer the internet and online, like a lot of other things, are full of opinions. And so I think you need to have a non-objective type of conversation. You need to have data kind of driving it. And so by looking at the data, it's super helpful. So I think creating a dashboard up front is really helpful. And then the other thing is you need to start creating experiences that are beyond streaming. And so you need to not, if you're just streaming your service and you're calling it church, we know church is much more than just streaming. So you need to provide atmospheres where there's something more than just somebody sitting in a chair and watching something. So the number one things is creating a open space where people can connect with each other. So a Facebook group, a WhatsApp group, whatever that is, it's a space that it's kind of like it's like a church patio, or it's like an open public space where people can talk to each other. And so a Facebook group for us has been very helpful. And what I do with that Facebook group, I talk about that group on the weekend in my emails, my messages. And then when you join the group, there's a pinned video from me where I say, hey, thanks for joining this group with our online church. Introduce yourself, share where you're watching from. And when they share where they're watching from, people go, oh, wow, I'm close. And there's community and spark that happens. And then the other thing is start thinking about creating some introductory courses, video courses, where you can actually talk to your people. So in my church, we have something called membership, and we call it Class 101. And one of the most beautiful things about this class is that it actually explains what it means to be part of our community. It's like a tutorial video. It's like when you get a new camera or a new computer or a new whatever, or like a book. The introduction tends to set the tone. What does it mean? And recording like a 15-minute, 20-minute video of like, what does it mean to be part of your online church? it really kind of contextualizes a lot of what the expectation is. And so I have found, outside of just setting the plan, getting a space for people to connect, like a Facebook group or WhatsApp group, building the dashboard, and then also having like a 15-minute standalone video. So anytime somebody messages you, emails you, wants to take a next step, you send them this link, and now they're like, you set the tone. And so we do this. We have a page that's kind of our introduction called saddlebackonline.com. And it's pretty basic. It's actually a ClickFunnels page. And it actually we explain what does it mean to be part of our online church. And it's very simple. And we invite them to take our membership class and all these things. But I think too many people don't realize when you say online church, it's confusing. If you didn't grow up in church, you're like, what does that mean? But by having like an introductory video, it kind of sets the tone of like what we're actually asking them to do.
So that's very interesting. So I have one follow-up question on that is when you do that, when you do the first 2 points that you mentioned, the measurement dashboard and the groups. So is there, do you also, what kind of metrics do you measure on the groups? Should you combine that with the dashboard? Personally, what do you do when you measure engagements on the groups?
Yeah. So first off, on the Facebook group, I do look weekly at how many comments happened the last 7 days. So I measure that every week. So if we had, and it's not a perfect metric, but at least I have found likes are pretty easy to get. Shares are a little harder, but comments show that there's actually something deeper happening. So I just look at every 7 days, how many comments we got. And then specifically in our groups, we do have a different strategy on the health of our groups. It's a whole nother conversation about how do we know a small group is healthy. But on our Facebook group, we look at comments. That's probably the easiest thing. And in Facebook, you go into insights, you go to growth, and it will actually tell you that.
Yeah. So is this part of the 3 approach? Is this part of the nearby approach? Or I think it's also overlapping with the anywhere approach. So what would you say?
Yeah. So you're talking about these 3 different high level approaches. The first one is this kind of nearby approach where everything you're doing online draws them in to your local church. Kind of an anywhere approach, or like a hybrid approach, is you're really allowing people to watch far away to engage. And then lastly is this hybrid where you're doing local and anywhere. For our church, we definitely are kind of that hybrid. We are using the internet to kind of amplify what we're doing. And then we have this strategy of bringing them back in locally. For us, that makes sense because of our size. I would recommend 90% of churches, when you're starting out, just figure out the correlation of somebody watching locally, showing up in person, and think about local. Because the idea is that it's kind of like that phase thing. The more you figure out local, the more you can figure out everything else. And I think sometimes churches get overwhelmed because the internet is scary because geography is not important. But don't worry if you're a church, in this part of the world or that part of the world, don't think about how do I have membership for people far away. That's like advanced algebra. You know what I mean? Like that's calculus. Focus in on like the basic arithmetic. And so local is where you should start. And then as your church grows and maybe you have a bigger vision, you can start to unlock what does it look like for somebody far. Because really one of the biggest questions in this is, do you want somebody to be a member of your church or a full participant of your church if they live an hour away? Like, do you want them to get everything? And if you don't, then it drives the approach. The approach is to be local. But if you're going to if you want somebody to be a member of a church and they live an hour away, now you're going to need to launch groups. You're going to need to launch courses. You're going to need to have a pastor. Like if somebody passes away and they will need a funeral or they need to get married, are you doing that? And these are some of the more robust questions that you'll have to start to like wrestle with.
What are some of the tools that you use and what you recommend that ministries use to build a healthy online ministry? What are some of the tools that you use and what are your favorites?
Yeah, so I would say, a big one that I would recommend most churches to check out is the church online platform. I think that there's a free tool that you can stream and schedule services in a very simple way. Practically a lot of what I use is probably, nothing that's radical, but it's, I use email heavy still, even in my context. So MailChimp is a great tool that we use. Also, different types of, and this is getting into the nitty gritty of like, how do I just facilitate connections? There are one design tool I use, Canva. I use Hootsuite for a lot of our scheduling and different things. I'm trying to think. There's a lot of random tools that we use to facilitate. But I think streaming-wise, the church online platform is probably the thing churches should lean into. And then I use a lot of the free tools, Facebook and YouTube, and Instagram. And so those things are pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I think the native platforms actually give you a lot of tools. I mean, even the Facebook Creator Studio now has so much built into it. So
yeah, I still get confused by Creator Studio. I got to be honest. I feel like they're always moving things around. I was like, how many clicks I got to get in to figure out like, why is video over here and this over here? But they're working on it. But I just want to let you know, if you get confused by Facebook, I get confused too as well.
That's good to know. And and then one final question before going to your closing thoughts is this is for media guys who are listening to us. I mean, there are many young media professionals who have got into this space of serving ministries, serving Christian nonprofits and churches and so on out of a passion for spreading the gospel. So as someone who is an online pastor of a large church, what would you recommend their approach be? Like, how should they look at working with churches? What is a tip that you would say when they start working with churches? What tip would you give them to make the partnership more meaningful?
I think one thing is understand, churches have a big vision, even if the pastor doesn't fully understand that, but they have a big vision. And I think a lot of times media is really scary because it could feel like a releasing type of thing where you kind of lose control of it. But understand that churches have a big vision, even if, they've probably forgotten it. But it's pretty clear there in Matthew 28 and 22 of what we're all called to do. The other thing is that don't be surprised if they're scared of change. Some of our greatest strengths as a church is that we preserve things. We preserve our faith. We're part of something that's 2,000 years old. And so part of that is we built up some, some kind of, almost like it's like skin. My dad is a construction worker. He works with his hands, and his hands are all, he's got tough hands. I don't have tough hands. I work on a computer, but that's because over years and years and decades, calluses start to form. And I think churches have calluses of not embracing change to preserve doctrine, which is a good thing, but that also is really hard for them to embrace new things. So don't be surprised when they don't immediately believe in your idea. You need to understand where they're coming from. And I would say part of what you do is you get success with small things. Don't think too radical. Don't pitch the too radical. Lean into the small. And as you embrace and you're a good steward with the small thing, you will start to be able to do more. And so those are some things just thinking about church leaders overall.
Wow, that is so insightful. Thank you so much. Any closing thoughts before we move on?
I think just being a creature of just in the creature of just always learning is so important. This thing, it's like Moore's law. Technology is always evolving. And trust me, I am not in a place where I know, even 2% of this, but something that I love and is learning from other people. And I think that's something that Jesus was modeled us, and we are learning all from each other. And what I love about the internet right now overall is that it's not just it's not the United States or the West that's leading in this. It's that we're all learning from each other, and we're all becoming global citizens, which again, a church leader might be really scared about. But I think for us, it's being in that position of learning from the 13-year-old YouTuber, learning from your, maybe a family member that's like rocking it. Because it's really, if you're in the position of learning, the internet is an amazing place.
So Jay, where can people learn more about you? They want to know and learn and, follow you. What is the best way to do that?
Yeah, check out my website, go to jkranda.com. And I share a lot of our learnings of what online ministry looks like. I tend to try to be very honest, and it's almost like inside my brain, both the good and the bad and everything in between. So,
Jay, thanks for spending your time with me. We really appreciate it. Thanks for sharing your insights.